Hi, my name is Julie Bellemare, and I'm the curator of early modern glass here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Today, I'm going to take you on a short tour of our newest exhibition, Sensorium, Stories of Glass and Fragrance. So this is an exhibition that came about when we were trying to think about through lines across the history of glass. And of course, scent is one of those through lines from the earliest glass vessels that have been produced on the Eastern Mediterranean up until today. We cannot think about perfume without thinking about glass. So this exhibition provides an overview of this history of perfume bottles, but it also, with the exhibition, we also wanted to go beyond just perfume bottles and think about the wider relationship between glass and scent, especially with other types of fragrant materials, such as we will see in a second, like potpourri or scented oils or snuff, which is powdered tobacco mixed with fragrant materials. So really the exhibition kind of takes you through a chronology of perfume vessels, but also broadens thematically to sort of explore that wider relationship between glass and fragrance. So we can start this tour over here with a garniture set that was created in France in the 18th century. This is what I like to call a scent machine for the home. So none of these vessels contain perfume, but they were all made to diffuse scent in the home. So the central vessel is a potpourri holder, so fresh flowers and spices. It would be put inside this vessel, and there is an opening just below the rim to let the fragrance out. And so this vessel is flanked by two candlestick holders, again, diffusing the scent of the wax and the candles. And then those are finally flanked by two cut flower vases. So really this, organized and put on a mantelpiece would have diffused fragrance in the room. Another type of material that is not, strictly speaking, perfume is aromatic oils and spiced oils. So there's been quite a bit of research on this type of object in recent years. So here we have a set of 4 flasks that came in a box, and these square flasks were probably produced in Europe, but decorated in India, possibly Gujarat or Rajasthan. And these kinds of objects, there are ceramic ones as well, were commissioned by Dutch merchants to give as diplomatic gifts to local rulers around the Indian Ocean. So it is thought that they contained 4 precious oils, probably from the Indonesian and South Asian spice trade. So those would have probably been cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and mace. And so this object inspired the scent experience that we have in the exhibition. We felt like we couldn't have an exhibition about scent without having that possibility of smelling at least a few things. So here we have the 4 spices, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and mace. So visitors can open these flaps and smell the oils, which are, pretty fresh and put in every week. And I should say that this is an exhibition that was put together mostly from works in our collection. We have a pretty wide collection when it comes to perfume materials and vessels. But we were very lucky to have one loan, which is this spectacular pair of bottles that were designed by the American artist James Turrell and manufactured by the crystal house Lalique in France. So we are accustomed to seeing James Turrell's work in large-scale installations, and he likes to, play with light and color to create illusions of space. And we can see in this set of perfume bottles that some of these sensibilities are preserved in the medium of glass. The they do contain perfume. The two perfumes are inspired by Terrell's home state of Arizona. So one, Range Rider on the left, is more of a leathery, ranchy scent, and the one on the right, Purple Sage, is inspired by the herb purple sage. And the two vessels sort of draw inspiration from architecture. So we have a pyramid, and the other one is inspired a little bit more by a Indian Buddhist stupa. So fantastic pieces, and they really sort of create this draw in the exhibition to sort of welcome visitors as they enter our galleries. So when we move into the main space of the exhibition, the way that this space is organized is that on the outer perimeter, we have really more of a history of perfume bottles. And in the middle, we have 4 stories that are a little bit more thematic and that branch out from that history. So, for instance, in this first case, we have a display of perfume equipment and distillation tools that would that completely impacted the development of perfume. So, without distillation, you cannot make perfume that is alcohol-based or even some, fragrant waters. So we have a couple of tools like this alembic right here, and the distillation equipment is illustrated in a fantastic book from the 16th century that is lent to us from our own Reykau research library. So this book dates to 1512, and it has woodblock printed illustrations that are hand painted that really illustrate this distillation equipment and some of those techniques. Because sometimes only the alembic or the top of the system would be made of glass and the rest would be made of brick or other materials. So it's really helpful to have some illustrations. These illustrations are very light sensitive, so we will have to turn the page in a couple of months to another set of illustrations. So if we start at the very beginning, so 2,500 years ago, some of the earliest vessels that were made in glass were made by core forming. So really having a friable core that is then wrapped in glass or dipped in glass and decorated. And this is a very time-intensive or labor-intensive method of production. So only the wealthiest patrons or elites would be able to own this sort of perfume vessel and the perfume contained within it. So it really tells you something about, how precious the contents were. And then in the Roman period, we see the advent of glass blowing. And this sort of makes perfume a little bit more commonplace, so at least, perfume can be carried and can be housed in vessels a little bit more easily because glass blowing makes glass slightly cheaper. And Romans were known for their bathing rituals, so perfumes were very much part of those rituals. Number 7 over here is the very elegant bird-shaped bottle. It was made in the 1st century of this era, and it's always been a mystery to me how exactly it was made. And luckily, our expert glassblower, William Goodenrath, was able to recreate the making method for this kind of vessel. So it's a mix of glass blowing and flame working. And together we recreated also how the bird vessel would have been filled and used with perfume. So this type of bottle, there are several similar bottles that were found in archaeological contexts. And the tail is cracked off, and scientists were able to look at the remnants and analyze the remnants of, little bits that were contained within the bottle, and found that they were remnants of perfume. So we know that this type of vessel was used for perfume, and it turns out that you could, use and reuse the bottle by cracking the tail open and sealing it shut on the flame of a candle, for instance. So that would have been pretty easy to do for someone at home. And there's a video you can watch, and we will link it. And as we move into more of our Islamic glass material, you start seeing vessels that have very narrow mouth openings and that contain either small amounts, small volumes of perfume, or larger bottles. So the larger bottles were used for fragrant waters, like rose water. Rose water was so important to this period that we have a thematic case that explore rose water. So Damascus roses were, originated from Central Asia, and they were cultivated in Syria and in that area, were not at all endemic to Europe. So something that we see as now such a mainstay of, let's say, English gardens was actually a very exotic flower for most of the medieval and Renaissance period. So here we see how the appeal of this substance really triggered the creation of rosewater sprinklers in 3 different times and geographic areas that look completely different. So we have one rosewater sprinkler that was made between the 12th and the 12th and the 14th century in the Middle East. We have one that was made in Venice in the 18th century, enameled milky white glass to imitate Chinese porcelain imports to Turkey, very interestingly. And then we have one Catalonian example from Spain in Almoroxa. So 3 very different vessels for one very precious substance. And if we move back to our history of perfume bottles, this case focuses on the early modern period. So we have mostly pieces from the late 1600s all the way to the early 1900s. At this time, the south of France becomes a powerhouse of perfume production, and so does northern India. So we have, for instance, a perfume bottle like number 2 here that has an enameled decoration of flowers. I don't think this is a coincidence because the French government and economy under Louis XIV at this time became more protectionist because they wanted to protect themselves from imports that were coming from Asia and other regions. So they really emphasized growing the local economy, and that really profited the horticulture and the flower producers in the south of France, as well as the glove perfumers in the same region. So at this moment, foreign materials for perfume, like musks and certain resins and certain oils, were not used in perfume anymore, or much less because they were becoming more and more expensive. So instead, flowers became dominant in French perfume. So hence, possibly the decoration on this bottle. And maybe it's worth saying that perfume was often made at home or on a small scale. There were recipe books for perfume around this time. There were professional perfumers, and perfume could be bought from them as well. But many owners would have these small personalized bottles that they could fill with their favorite fragrances. So, and some of them were very portable. As you can see here, we have a set of, we have 3 different types of very small perfume bottles. And for this particular gold box pair, it comes with a funnel so that you could decant your favorite fragrances in the small portable bottles. And I know it's hard to see, but the detail on the gold box is actually replicating a glass furnace. So you have tiny, tiny figures that are enameled and in relief, and there's some gaffers getting some, or blowing glass. There's a small figure at the back stoking the furnace. Incredible detail, very high-end type of perfume container Some of these bottles have odd shapes, like this tall, slender bottle. I've seen two different explanations for this kind of shape. One is that women would slip it in their corsets, and the other one is that men would slip it into their boots when they would go riding or anywhere else, so you could always have perfume on the go. And then finally, we have two examples that are non-Western. So these two small perfume bottles from India, also from northern India. So the town of Kanauj is still known today as a very important perfume producing center. And the perfumes that they make are mostly sandalwood oil-based rather than alcohol-based. And finally, the dove-shaped perfume container. It's possible that this was a rose water sprinkler as well, because the body is quite bulky. It would hold more perfume, so possibly something that's more diluted. The Ottoman Empire was known for its flower cultivation, and also this was a glass-making center in Beykoz in Turkey that was very active in the early 19th century. Before moving on a little bit further, I have another early modern story here. So this case makes the argument that fragrant materials made glass travel. So we have two comparisons. So on the left, we have snuff boxes that were made in Europe, and on the right, we have snuff bottles made in China. What you might see is that the materials are quite similar. So at the top, the gold box has a very tiny inlay at the bottom of aventurine glass. And the snuff bottle also has marvered splashes of the same type of aventurine glass, which is this glittery gold glass. So this was invented in Venice in the early 17th century. And the fact that a lot of small objects like watches or snuff boxes were sent to China as diplomatic gifts, or sometimes even as as goods by merchants, really triggered an interest in these types of rare glasses. To be clear, there was glass in China before the arrival of Europeans, but in certain particular cases, like aventurine, the glass was invented in Europe and then popularized in China. And something similar happens with gold ruby glass here at the bottom, which is a very complicated type of glass colorant that's extracted from gold. So the recipe the recipe differs slightly between European gold ruby glass and Chinese gold ruby glass. But it seems like the idea traveled across Eurasia. And what's interesting about snuff is that it's a powdered tobacco mixed with fragrant materials. From the recipe, we see that the snuff was mixed with sugar, or with things like bergamot or jasmine flower, and it makes it a little bit more palatable. But I think of snuff as, and tobacco as, one of the first truly global materials, because it was grown in the Americas and then traveled to Europe and traveled to China, and on its way carried glass techniques with it. So if we move quickly now through the 19th century, this is a time when this is a time of great diversity in perfume bottles, and we have perfume bottles that are made in Bohemia, in France, in England, and also in America. This is also a time when cologne becomes very popular. So cologne is not what we think of it here, for instance, right now, as a fragrance for men, but it was simply a more diluted form of perfume that was invented in Cologne, Germany. So a lot of the vessels for cologne are just a little bit bigger, have more volume because the substance is more diluted, so you would have a little bit more of it. Here I just want to point out some glass that was made in Corning by T.J. Hawkes and Company. So the glass was then shipped to Providence, Rhode Island to be overlaid with silver by the Gorham Company. The 19th century is a time that was pivotal for the perfume industry, and we start feeling those effects in the early 20th century in terms of perfume bottles. So what happens around 1850 is that perfumes become divorced from the natural world thanks to modern chemistry. So this is when you can start, producing a molecule that will smell like something in the natural world, like vanilla, for instance. So that, compounded together makes perfumes a lot more cheap and easier to produce, because all of a sudden you don't need to go, halfway across the world to get your materials. You can produce them in a lab. So perfume companies or perfumers will start really putting emphasis on the bottle and the packaging to maintain that idea of luxury and maintain their prices high. So in the early 20th century, you see perfume bottles that are really that respond to artistic and aesthetic trends of that period. So we have some more like Art Nouveau inspired bottles. The perfume atomizer has what was called at the time a King Tut decoration, so Egyptomania. And then we have some more Art Deco bottles with René Lalique. And so the museum has a fantastic collection of Lalique bottles, and it was very difficult to make a selection here. But we can start with the first perfume bottle that he designed for Coty. According to the story, he was asked to design a label for this bottle, but was insulted by that task. So instead, he designed the entire bottle. After working with Coty, Lalique worked with several other perfume companies, including D'Orsay, and I thought it was interesting that just a year before the very famous iconic Chanel No. 5 bottle came on the market, with its very clean lines and modernist aesthetic, Lalique had created some very similar sets of bottles in 1920. This is also a time when scents come into different formats. So for Dans la Nuit here for Worth, we have a small bottle containing a stronger concentrated perfume, and in the larger bottle we have a powder. Powders are still sold today. Sometimes people have allergies or just prefer the lightness of the powder, but same scent, two different packaging options. And if we flash forward to number 10, this is the Artist Show perfume burner, not a perfume bottle. So when you open this, when you take off this lid, there's a wick that would burn perfume. And this is from 1927. At this time, there were concerns with airborne diseases like tuberculosis, and sanitaria were being constructed, like, open air kind of hospitals with a lot of air circulation to sort of treat patients. And these perfume burners were also marketed as sort of things that could purify your air. So I feel like this is kind of a product of its time and still relevant today in terms of our concern for airborne diseases and air purification. Throughout the history of perfume, these perfumes and scented materials were often thought to have medicinal properties, and this is something that we still think of today, for instance, with aromatherapy. But glass vessels were also used to house actual medicines that were maybe a little bit more pungent or that had different smells or tastes. So, for instance, number 2 here is a bottle that came to us from Japan. It's unclear whether it was made in Japan, but on the box it had the Japanese characters for peppermint oil. So peppermint oil is not something that you would traditionally see in perfumery. It was actually a medicine. So peppermint could be used as a remedy for colds in East Asia. When you look at the literature on natural history, there, and also as an ointment for bug bites and that sort of thing. So, this bottle was a medicine bottle in Japan. It's been cataloged as a perfume bottle in the past, but really peppermint oil is more of a medicine. Number 3 and 4, the yellow and the blue small bottles are what we call pungents, or bottles for smelling salts. These are ammonium carbonate, so they're still used today on the football field to revive someone who has fainted. But in the 19th century, women would carry them on them when they fainted or when they wanted to perform this idea of femininity associated with fragility and be revived. So yeah, a very different use for a scented material inside one of these small bottles. So if we move back to our timeline, we're now in the 1930s to 60s. This is a time when people are recovering from the Great Depression, going through World War II. So bottles become much more aspirational for the middle class. So we have some high quality bottles, but also some that were made slightly more cheaply, let's say in Bohemia for export, like this cut bottle with the formidable stopper, snowflake shaped, really beautiful, but still slightly more affordable, for the American market. And some of these bottles were available in department stores, which were relatively new at the time, especially in the United States. And this is very different from the next wave of perfume bottles that were created by artists. So in the American studio glass movement, many artists were starting to use glass as a medium for artistic expression. And they appreciated the small scale of the perfume bottle because it allowed them to work out some of their techniques on a small scale before moving on to larger works. So, for instance, number 2 here is a beautiful bottle by Silvia Vigiletti, colored using fuming techniques. So using a piece of silver, and the smoke of it creates this yellow color of the glass, and also exploring ideas of the void and different techniques in here. The odd one out in this case is the bottle by Salvador Dali, who is not part of the studio glass movement. This bottle shows, it's kind of this abstracted, smelling apparatus. So we have the nose and the lips, basically all that we need to smell. And this design was extracted from one of his late paintings of Aphrodite. So at this time, Salvador Dali was quite old, and we don't know how much of this he actually designed himself. This was in 1983, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And at this time, his secretary was taking advantage of his signature and his name, so it's not clear how much of it he designed himself, but it still looks iconic. And this would have been the end of the story if we didn't make any new acquisitions to sort of bring this forward from the 1980s into the present. So we're so lucky to have 3 new acquisitions that were made especially for this exhibition. So the first of these is a pair of bottles created by Goldie Poblador, who's a Filipina artist working in New York City. So this pair is called Squalor for women and Squalor for men. This is the 3rd version of the work that the artist has created. The first 2 versions contained polluted water from the Pasig River in Manila. This version contains polluted water from the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, New York. So really this is part of an artistic movement or sensibility that uses scent as an expressive medium. So you can imagine, smelling some of these, polluted waters or, pungent materials that don't necessarily smell good. This is not a perfume bottle in the traditional sense of the word, but smelling a bad smell really has an immediate impact on the body that maybe tells, or maybe communicates a message more effectively than by strictly visual means. So this is part of this idea of like olfactory art that Catherine Gray also explored in this work over here, which is an updated version of paper sleeve wax and block, something that she created for the Toledo Museum of Art a few years ago. This is a new version of the work with the original smells. So these are smells of the hot shop. So first you have, burning newspaper, you have a Kevlar sleeve, a beeswax block, and the block of wood that is, kept in water and used to shape the bubble. So these 4 smells are inset into flame-worked glass bases that allude to the shapes of these materials. And so Cathy Gray, when she hit 50, felt that she couldn't no longer bear all of the demands of glass blowing and wanted to create these smells with a perfumer as a sort of reminder of what it felt like to be in a hot shop. So, smell can be a trigger for memory, and it can be used in this way as an artistic medium as well. So, very interesting work. And finally, we have these hand-blown glass cloches or covers or capelos in Spanish that display beautiful botanical bundles. So these were created by 2 Mexican designers, Héctor Esraue and Ignacio Cadena, for the company Xinu. And Xinu is a perfumery based in Mexico City that creates perfumes only with natural botanicals from the Americas. So this is kind of a reaction to those synthetic smells and molecules that have completely permeated the perfume industry for the past 100 years. And so their line of perfume contain things like agave or monstera or this sort of local botanical ingredients that you don't normally see in perfumery. So when they launched their line of candles, they had this beautiful table, like showroom display of the natural botanicals that under these cloches that could be possibly could be lifted to smell the materials. So this is a very different way of containing scent and perfume in a way that's a little bit more ephemeral than liquid perfumes. So here we go. This is it for the tour of Sensorium. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will come to see the exhibition in person at the Corning Museum of Glass. Thank you.